This week is the parsha portion that we're going to read is Tetzaveh. The only parsha that Moshe Rabbeinu's name doesn't appear. We're going to be learning today something from a very special book, Mei Shiloach, the first book of Ishbitz Chasidus. So the Torah we're learning, if anybody's following, we'll try to translate it as we go along. I don't know if we'll do it word for word. I mean, this Torah happens to be somewhat short. Some of the Torahs here are a little bit longer. So I don't know if we'll be learning this book every week and if we'll translate every time. We'll try to give a translation. But if you're following, so the Torah starts Ve'asita Mizbach Ktoret. Mizbach Miktar Ktoret. That's the verse in the Torah that we're contemplating on now. If we're going to make this our custom to learn the Ishbitz Chassidus, very, very profound thoughts, some of the varying types of contemplations that you get here. So this one is also relatively more abstract, but we're trying to focus on the more psychological concepts or the more psychological ideas that arise from the concepts that the Ishbitzer Rebbe here is contemplating on. So I'll read it from inside. I'll try to translate it briefly, and then again we'll contemplate on it somewhat. So he says like this: the verse says, "V'asita mizbeach miktar ktoret." That HaKadosh Baruch Hu, one of the vessels in the Mishkan, one of the artifacts that needs to be crafted is the mizbeach hazahav, the golden altar where the ktoret, the incense, is sacrificed on. So that was one of the artifacts in the Mishkan. Now he brings from the Zohar what this artifact represents. So he says like this: so all the artifacts were all mentioned in the previous parsha that we just read yesterday, in Parshat Truma. Except for this one artifact. So this one artifact, just the golden mizbeach, where the ktoret is the incense is sacrificed. That's the only one that's mentioned in our parsha. Even though most of them, in the last parsha we read, Truma, so a big portion of the parsha is describing all of the building of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle in the desert. But this one artifact isn't mentioned there. It's only mentioned here. So it's mentioned later. There's something about this artifact that needs to be later than all of the other artifacts. So again, also as I'll explain, the spiritual faculty that this represents is something that has to appear only in a later stage of all of the previous entities, or the previous spiritual faculties were discussed in the previous parsha. Mitam de'ita b'Zohar Kadosh. He quotes the Zohar. The Zohar says the ktoret ktira dekula. So there's a linguistic game here in the Zohar that says that ktoret, the word for incense, is the same word for ketira, which means to make a knot or a tie. Now, a knot or a tie, especially in Hebrew, kesher. When you say there's a kesher, the word means connection. And ketira comes from the word kesher in Hebrew. So to make a connection, to make a tie between two things is like to associate between two things. And the words in Hebrew, they intertwine, the roots of these words. So just like you'd say, again, also logically, making a knot is connecting two things. So you can also make intellectual knots or associative knots. So mizbach haktoret, sacrificing of the incense, the word for incense is also the word for knots. So this artifact where the incense is brought to Hashem, so the knots, the connections, all of your associative connections are brought to Hashem. This sacrifice is what's happening in the golden mizbeach in the tabernacle. היינו שמרמז כי כל הדברים הנעשים אף בעולם הזה הכל מקושר ברצון השם יתברך. ובלתי רצונו לא יעשה שום דבר. So this is alluding to the fact that everything that happens in reality is all intertwined, like a butterfly theory. Everything is associative, everything is intertwined. All of this hashgacha prati, there's divine providence on all details. And not only is there divine providence that every detail is being led and actualized by Hashem, but there's also a connection between everything. So everything doesn't stand alone. It's part of like a grand master plan. So there's a connection, an associative connection between all the details of reality. Now, realizing this or surfacing that point of connection within every scenario, in every creation, every existence, surfacing that is the idiom of bringing or sacrificing and rising, elevating all the details of creation, just like we do also physically in the in the incense, you take all sorts of different ingredients. And again, a lot of these things, like a lot of concepts in Mei HaShilach, or generally in a lot of the general Hasidus books, the Hasidic books, like in Chabad, relatively, you'll get more detailed contemplations. And a lot of times things won't be just stated. So when you study a book like Mei HaShilach, so there's a lot of statements being made. So either you take it for granted, or you need to study the broth of the background where everything is coming from. So these topics are usually contemplated on throughout Hasidic study, and a lot of what he says is alluding to previous knowledge, or again, or you can count on him. So we don't want to prolong these classes too much. We don't want to go on and trail from thought to thought. We don't want to make too much associative connections here. But this idea of the Ktoret alluding to a variety, array of different details in reality is explained in many places in Chasidut. So just like the physical expression that you take all sorts of ingredients, and each ingredient, as explained, represents something, and also the variety of ingredients is also technically very, very different, varies very differently from different trees and animals and blood of different animals, very different. Also, there are kosher, pure ingredients, and there are also non-kosher ingredients. It's actually the only sacrifice made in reality that takes a non-kosher faculty from creation. Everything else that's brought into the temple or into the tabernacle is only pure animals. So the only sacrifice that's made from something that's impure, the blood of a certain serpent, of a certain animal, unpure animal, the only thing that's sacrificed that way is in the Ktoret. Again, so these are all things, he doesn't mention this. He just says what the Zohar quotes and is elaborated on in many places, that this practice, this sacrifice in the temple, in the tabernacle, you take all of the details, the array of details from reality, and you put them together and you elevate them to Hashem, is alluding to the ability to surface the intertwined connection, like the divine providence that connects all of the vast details of creation. So that's the sacrifice of the Ktoret, of the incense in the temple. Now, so he says that this sort of contemplation, this is a very basic, could be very profound. It's like a very basic concept in Chasidut or in Jewish thought, that there's divine providence. And saying that there's divine providence immediately implies that there's a connection between things. So if HaKadosh Baruch Hu is running the show, and he's taking care of all the details in my life and in your life and all of creation, and even again, just like the scientific butterfly theory, anything that happens anywhere in the universe is part of this master plan. And nothing is random, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu he's doing creation. Creation is an action. It's something that's being done, and it exists ex nihilo. So someone's creating it. So reality is a verb. It's not a noun per se. So that's the implication of saying that there's a creation, implying that our reality is a verb. It's something that Hashem does. So that implication immediately, again, logically, if I comply to this, if I believe, if I comprehend reality as an action of something that someone's doing, it doesn't exist in of its own. So I see it as something that's being done. So every detail is something that's like if you view reality as an action, like a verb, so everything becomes important. It's something it's purposeful. Like when you do something, then there's purpose to everything you're doing. It's not just, if it's something just standing there, so it implies that there's not necessarily associated, you wouldn't associate it with a meaning or that it implies anything. But if it's a verb, if someone's doing something, so there's intent. Now, the second you view reality as something that Hashem is doing, so immediately there's an intent. Now, intent connects all the dots. So it's like if you see someone, I don't know, fixing your car. So maybe he's doing all sorts of things that you don't understand, but that you assume, and hopefully you're correct, that he has a certain intent, maybe even a good intent to fix your car and what he's doing. So it automatically makes you assume that there's a connection between all the dots, that everything he's doing, if he's unscrewing one screw and connecting another screw, even if you don't have the understanding to comprehend how it all works together, but it would imply that everything he does coexists. Now, same thing in our creation. So the sacrifice of the incense is revealing or acquiring this point of view where we try to reveal and contemplate and meditate on how all of the details of reality come together. So really connecting all the dots of the universe could be could be big data, somewhat complicated, somewhat difficult, but within a person's life. So this is definitely something that can be very experiential, where there are a lot of random occurrences happening. When a person says that he's experienced hashgacha pratit, divine providence, what does he usually mean? Usually what he means is that all sorts of things happened to me. And at a certain point of time, everything came together. Like I realized how missing the bus here, or talking to that person, or that random encounter, everything came together and at a certain point revealed a certain divine providence, where I could feel, I could sense, I could see how Kadosh Baruch Hu was leading this and leading me in a certain direction, a good direction. So that sensation of dots coming together, a lot of random details coming together, that is the contemplation that the Ktoret implies. Now, what does he say? That this experience, this sensation, which is like, again, like an unveiling of Hashem's involvement, not just involvement, initiative involvement, initiated involvement, where he's running the show, could give a person a sense of lack of choice or irrelevance in the outcome, the dictation of his own life. Because if everything's b'hashgacha pratit, if I feel that sensation that everything is divinely orchestrated, so it kind of diminishes the importance of my self-involvement. So a person could become negligible. That's what he's implying, what he's saying here. That this contemplation, or this sacrifice of the ktoret, of the incense, where you put all the dots together, so when you get that image of Hashem's initiative involvement in all the details of your life, it could have an implication on how seriously you take your personal choice, your personal involvement. So you could take things lightly. You could be negligible about your own initiative. That's not a good thing. So for this reason, as I'll explain now, this is why this service or this contemplation has to always come last. That's what he's going to say. So that's why this contemplation, or this artifact of and what it represents, wasn't mentioned together with all the other artifacts of the tabernacle in the previous parsha, and it was delayed to the next parsha, to our parsha. So the main faculty that was already discussed, even though, again, all of the artifacts were discussed in the previous parsha, but the main faculty, which is also one of the most detailed points, or most detailed topics of the tabernacle, are the clothes, the garments of the high priest, the 8 fascinating, very special garments. Now, again, like I said, all of these concepts are very, very in length elaborated on in Chasidut. So each one represents something else, but in general he mentions that the garments of the high priest represent awe. Each one of them is a different type of awe. That's what he's saying. Great awe. Again, where a person is, we'd say, takes himself very seriously, very, very trepidatious. Trepidation and awe come from a sensation of importance. That what I'm doing it has dire consequences. So my choices, I need to be, again, it's the opposite of the sensation we were saying before, where a person could be negligible and feel that his choice isn't very important. So my sense of involvement is what breeds my awe, or my trepidation, my caution in the service of Hashem. And that's what the garments of the high priest represent. Again, this is all he's bringing from the Zohar. As explained in the Gemara. So in the Gemara, it's mentioned how each one of these garments is something that compensates or rectifies different sins, different negligible deeds that a person could do, because the garments represent the opposite of negligence. So the high priest, by wearing these garments, he rectifies or elevates all of the people's consciousness to strengthen their trepidation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So only after that was mentioned in the previous parsha can we reach the sacrifice of the incense, which is this contemplation of the synchronization of all the details of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's involvement. So that, again, that's a brief elaboration and translation of what he said. Now, we'll take the main point that we want to contemplate on here. He mentioned two sides of we could say, my experiential relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Like everything, different or contradictory experiences by essence are all coexistence. I mean, the most basic faculty of godliness is that it's paradoxical. So in our consciousness, in our reality, everything is finite, and the inherent trait of finitude is that paradoxes can't coexist. So all paradoxes in our reality are always broken down. So there's either black or white. So you have to put it in different places or different times. You can't coexist. You can't be black and white. You can't be a round triangle. But conceptually, they coexist within godliness. So same thing here. These are maybe one of the most fundamental concepts. I mean, it's also true that there's self-involvement. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, He creates the world, and He gives us free will. But it's also true that there's divine providence. And now, these two concepts, as explained in many, many sources in Torah, are maybe the most fundamental paradox, or consciously one of the most difficult paradoxes to contemplate, to contain. That we also have free will, also have free involvement, and also there's providence. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is also involved in our life. And these two things don't contradict. Now, in order for them to not contradict for us, we need to organize them, just like any paradox. Again, the entire, like we said before, the entire base of finitude, like our finite world, which is basically made up of time and space, like Einstein even didn't like calling that two things, just time space, is like you can view it as a pattern or a way, a knack to be able to break down paradoxes. That's what time and space are. If you have paradoxes like black and white, so the way to break down a paradox that you can't contain coexistence is either you put it in two different places. You have black here and white here, or in two different times, first black and then white. So all of reality, that's what finitude is. Finitude is a method of breaking down paradoxes. Same thing here. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's involvement, and on the other hand, his willingness or will to give us space, like to pull away, again, like parenting, you take that as an allegory. Like a parent, he also wants to be very involved in his children's life on the one hand. He also wants to allow them to grow. He wants to give them space. He wants to take a step back. Now, again, like, as parents, we could be also fondling with that paradox and not doing it so well, because Baruch Hu, he wants to do them both, and he actually does them both. But in order for us to realize both involvements, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is also giving us space and simultaneously also involved, so in our minds we can't contain both together. So we need to organize them. And what he wants to say here is that it's fundamental, again, to digest the paradox correctly. We have to organize it just like these parashot are organized. At first, you have to contemplate on the seriousness, the formidability of reality. Because if you start with Hashem's involvement, if that's the first concept you digest, then it might create or mitigate the seriousness of how you take reality. It might create a certain, like we said before, negligibility. That I don't feel that my choice matters. So first, the Torah describes the artifacts of the tabernacle that represent the importance of a person's self-involvement. And once that's been set in a strong manner of how much HaKadosh Baruch Hu cares about your deeds and how involved how much room and space he gives you, how much choice he gives you, and how much he's involved in your choice and interested in your choice and willful for you to choose, how much your choice is something of importance to Hashem. So after that, he reveals his own involvement and how much he's leading the show and how much divine providence there is. And then it sweetens the harshness of your personal involvement. Now, also psychologically, that's a very, very important balance to maintain. On the one hand, we want to have awe. Again, awe, formidability, is something. When you just say the word awe, especially today in our modern day and age, people don't really like. In religious context, at least, people kind of think of fear and awe as something not so palatable. So everything has to be peace and love and very soft. But if you think about it, that's not true in life. And we don't awe and fear are like tension. So you don't want to be tense on the one hand, but you don't want to be too lax. So you want to have a certain tension in life, like again, like the strings of guitar. It has to be correct tension to produce a livelihood, something lebedik, to sound good. Yeah, it could be too tense and you can tear the string, but you don't want to be completely flexed. If you're completely relaxed, you're just dead. That's what happens to your body when you lose your livelihood. So people spend a lot of money today to get adrenaline drives, jumping, bungee jumping, or jumping out of planes, or watching horror movies. Again, fear and awe are a commodity. We want fear and awe. Also, in our service of Hashem, we want high tension. Now, high tension comes from a feeling of seriousness that our choice is important. Everything we do matters, but there's a formidability to that. Maybe I'll make the wrong choice. Maybe I'll miss the bus. Now, while I'm involved, I might get the notion that I don't want to. It's scary to think that everything's very serious. So it's very important to realize that fear, tension, and seriousness are a commodity. We don't want to lose that. We don't want not to take our life seriously. We want to take our life very seriously. But there's a formidability to that. And if you take it too seriously, like dead seriously, then it could be neurotic. So we always want to sweeten our fears. Now that's the pace of life. You can also realize this in your personal experience, that the way we go through life, that's why sweetening, or the realization of divine providence, just like in the order of the parashot, in the order of the chapters of the Torah, so also in our psychological experience of life, the realization of providence is always in retrospect. So after you've gone through, in experience, you always see like a section at a time, like a frame, like watching a movie. You see one frame at a time, and then you get to experience the seriousness of your involvement. But once you have a bird's eye view, and you can have retrospect on how all of these occurrences come together, and that's the contemplation of the Ktoret, of the incense, where you put all the details together and you elevate them to Hashem, so you can see how it's all a master plan and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is involved. But that experience in life, experientially, that's always in retrospect. It's always a second point of view, and that retrospect, it sweetens the formidability, the harshness of the tension. Now, so this way we get to gain both sides of the picture if we pace it correctly. So on the one hand, there's truth to reality. The experience of living is full of real involvement in what we do, and this is also how HaKadosh Baruch Hu experiences, or HaKadosh Baruch Hu views it, and He gives space. He creates us in a real manner, that our life and our reality is very, very real. But nonetheless, in retrospect, we can also see how everything is also happening, the occurrence is occurring within the bosom of Hashem. So when in retrospect you see the bigger picture, you can see how everything comes together. And then that sweetens the harshness of the serious awe that was experienced while you were involved in the process. So the processes should be taken with a lot of awe, a lot of seriousness. And always we should try to merit, to contemplate in retrospect and see how all the dots come together. And there you can see the context, the connections, the ksharim, the ktoret, which is what that word means, all of the ties of the knots between all the details. And that it reveals, exposes Hashem's involvement and sweetens the harshness of our own choice. So this is, again, a psychological expression of how we experience the paradox of free will and divine providence. And the correct pace, as he says, like the order of the parashot, is that first in the process you experience mainly the side of your free will. And you should take it very seriously. That experience is what Hashem is taking it seriously. And in retrospect, then when you see the broader picture, the bird's eye view, afterwards you look back at all the details, they come together, you see all the knots, and that exposes Hashem's involvement, Hashem's divine providence. So that's a word from the Ishbitz on the order of these parashot, between Truma and Tetzaveh. Bezrat Hashem, everybody should have a Shavuot of a good week. Bezrat Hashem, we have a whole week now to contemplate on this vort. And then by the time we reach Shabbos, we'll have retrospect. We'll be able to see all the divine providence that we're going through in the next few days of this week. Bezrat Hashem. So thank you for joining. And Bezrat Hashem, I hope everyone will be able to make a short vort, either from the Ishbitz or from one of the tzaddikim of the Chasidut. Kol Tuv.